Disabled people. What is your most bruh moment with an abled person? I was in Target while using my cane. I wasn't doing anything strange, just grabbing some pasta to make for dinner. A woman walked up to me and said, "Thank you for your service." I was very confused, to say the least, since I was a 16-year-old, and nothing about me said I was in the military. I responded back, "I'm sorry, what?" Thinking that I misheard her. She tells me, "Thank you for fighting for this country and sacrificing your ability to walk for our freedom." Now, I'm not the type to ever claim stolen valor. My father is a disabled veteran himself. I had absolutely no clue how to respond to that woman, though, so I just nodded my head and walked away. Another fairly common "what the hell" moment is strangers coming up to me in public and asking if they can pray for me. I always say yes to be polite, but the next few minutes while they pray are very uncomfortable for me. I wanted to say that I know I could just say no to the people who offer prayers, but I generally don't mind it. I know, at the end of the day, they're just trying to help a stranger in the most accessible way that they know how. I'm a chronically ill young adult, which makes a lot of people extremely uncomfortable to see. We don't like to be faced with the reality that our health can be taken at any time, regardless of your actions. Prayer is a way for people to cope with that uncomfortable emotion, and so I'm happy to facilitate that. At the end of the day, everyone involved gets to feel like they did a good deed. I guess it's like people who think a cane is a universal sign of "pray for me." Maybe we should start a counter movement. Cane equals do not approach. Story 2. My best friend lives in England while I live in Scotland. He has muscular dystrophy and I have hypermobility/fibromyalgia. We constantly joke back and forth about his wheelchair and my limping or cane use. So when I visited him at his university for a week, I was my usual self, making wheelchair jokes to his flatmates, the typical university crowd, easily offended and pursuing useless degrees. "How do you know Chair Bro?" I asked. "Oh, we were out drinking one night, started talking, and he's just a wheelie, stand-up guy." After a few days, it became clear they didn't like me. I was polite, made breakfast, and even offered to wash dishes, but it didn't seem to matter. Then it hit me. I was the only one making the disabled jokes. My friend hadn't made a single one the entire time. When I asked why, he said, "I don't feel comfortable enough around them for those jokes. It's usually just you and me and other friends who know us well." Fair enough. It dawned on me that I'd been having a good week, barely limping, and hadn't even taken my cane out of my bag. From their perspective, I was just a schmuck making fun of their disabled flatmate. He chose not to reveal the truth because he found it funnier. You win this round, wheelbro. Story 3. Currently working on getting a diagnosis for some crap that's been ruining my life for 4.5 years. It's bad enough being 25 in a room full of grandparents while waiting at the doctor's. Recently, I had a consultation with a cardiologist. Everyone up until then was pretty nice. A lady in the waiting room complimented my crochet. The nurses and NPs were really nice during testing and apologized for making me feel sick. But the doctor was just, I don't even know. He wasn't rude. He's South Asian, so maybe it was just a culture clash. But he came into the room, looked at me, looked at my chart, and said, "You're too young to have heart problems. What are you doing here?" Well, I was hoping you could fix my crap, A 2-hour trip to the cardiologist the day before my birthday isn't exactly my idea of fun. Get through the appointment, have the awkward moment of, "No, my medication is for bipolar, not seizures. I promise I don't have hypochondria. My parents just shouldn't have bread." Also, crappy looks on my way out through the much busier waiting room and a comment about young people faking for attention. Screw you, schmuck. Story 4. My parents are hippies, and they always walked around barefoot, so I would as well. We would put on shoes to go into buildings because some places don't like barefooters in their building, but outside we never wore shoes. So when I was young and my dad and I were out running errands, a lot of people thought we were homeless. This was compounded by the fact that he had a long beard and usually wore torn-up clothes. All the time, people would ask to pray for us, and we would find different ways of getting out of the situation. Usually, we would just say yes, but it's definitely awkward to have some old lady get down on her knees and pray for you when you're healthy and in the middle class. People have also offered to give me shoes, but I'll either straight up refuse or tell them I'm allergic to shoes. A good thing to do when someone asks to pray for you is say yes, but when they start, hiss in pain and run away. The allergic to shoes excuse is a classic. Next time, try "I'm a mermaid in training." Story 5. So many. I'm deaf. The most common issue is finding email contacts on websites and writing to request information, proactively stating that I am deaf and can't use the phone. Yes, there's relay, but people hang up. It takes too long, and not all operators are equal. It's just not good. I'd say at least 50% of the time I get a non-form letter response, so I know they've read my comment word for word but still want me to call them. Nope, still deaf. Another frustrating experience is being offered a braille menu at a restaurant. Many deaf people, like myself, rely heavily on lip reading. Offering braille to someone staring intently at you is just mind-boggling. Story 6. I and a coworker are both combat veterans. I can't hear very well, and he has eyes that face different directions due to a head injury. One day, our boss did a double mess-up. He looks at me and goes, "You hear that?" in reference to a dripping pipe I could not hear. And I say, "No." He goes exasperatedly, "How can you not hear that? Are you deaf?" And I point at my ear and say, "Yeah, partially." He gets flustered, then turns to my coworker and points to a line we were painting and asks, "Does that look crooked, you think?" And my buddy goes, "Hold on, let me check," then tilted his head one way, then the other, so each can get a look whilst yelling, "Camera 1, camera 2. Our boss was so embarrassed that he left the room without saying anything, red as a beet. Story 7. I'm a nurse and have a younger patient in our skilled rehab who a visitor was helping take to church. Said patient did not want to go, kept trying to be nice and politely say, "No thank you." Old lady church volunteer kept ignoring and pushing. Not sure what possessed me, probably because this particular volunteer is constantly overstepping boundaries to the point that it's a safety issue. But I came out from behind the desk and very loudly informed her that pushing someone's chair without consent is basically a crime. She has not attempted to encourage any of my patients to go since. I apologized profusely to my poor patient, who I thought was mortified, but she seemed to think it was funny, lol. Story 8. I have fibromyalgia, joint hypermobility, and currently 3 protruding discs in my spine. A while ago, I started doing a distance learning law degree, as I found law very interesting when I was doing my A-levels. I put on Facebook that I'd signed up for this and got so many responses telling me I was inspirational. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with my brain, you just come off as a condescending witch. Didn't post that though, just said it out loud on my screen. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain condition, and there's been research done which suggests the pain receptors aren't functioning as they should. They don't know what causes it. I have no idea what I did to get the protruding discs in my spine, but occasionally they'll lightly touch a nerve and that flippin' hurts like hell. Story 9. I have a little less known corneal dystrophy, so ever since I was a kid, I have had a lot of trouble with my sight and have had multiple eye surgeries. One time, I even lost my sight for a few days. People who have just bad eyesight and wear glasses have very often tried to relate, commenting that they know how I feel, which I understand comes from a good place. But occasionally, I do need to point out that there's a reason why I'm classified with a disability and they're not. Sometimes it's just better to listen instead of trying to relate. In general, people only have 2 ideas of how problems with eyesight work. You either get glasses and boom, you're cured, or you're blind and that's it. When I'm in a public place or in need of help to see something, I'm not often taken too seriously. And I've been told too many times just to get new glasses or I should see an optician. It's only when people who actually know my condition say this do I get that bruh moment. Story 10. First, I have scoliosis, had a body brace and surgery in my teens. I remember some woman my mother knew talking to my mother while we were getting groceries, and she was shaking her head at me in dismay and going on about how I was going to wind up in a wheelchair by the time I was 30. Well, it wasn't that severe. Past 30, still walking. Second, I have had psychosis episodes in the past and take medication for it. No episodes for a few years now, knock on wood. Walking and talking like a more or less functional person, so it's an invisible disability that I don't advertise to people. Can't tell you how many times I've had to keep my mouth shut listening to disgusting comments about crazy people. Grinds my gears. I also noticed that there are an awful lot of peculiar people who assume that they're mentally sound simply because they've never had to see a psychiatrist. I'm not nearly as confident as they are about their own condition. Story 11. I'm autistic. Specifically, reports show I have PDD-NOS, which is like when you have autism symptoms, but you don't qualify for an actual autism diagnosis, like a subset of autism. I go to the pool twice every week to exercise and lose weight. And one day, I met this guy who was in his late 20s, had autism as well, but he was more disabled than I was. His name was Ben, and he was a nice dude. We got to know each other and swam some laps. Turns out he's from the town I used to live in a similar program for autistic adults I was in, which I thought was cool. A few weeks later, I met up with him again. We got in the hot tub and caught up, and he asked me some questions that were repeated, like my name, which didn't stick. Out of left field, he asked me, "So, what do you have? Huh? For a disability?" I have autism, specifically PDD-NOS. It's like when you have autism symptoms, but you don't have enough to get an actual diagnosis of autism. Oh, well, you don't look autistic, you look smart. If you think this was the bruh moment, you'd be wrong. Everyone knows autism doesn't have a look, except in identifying physical behaviors, but I knew Ben's autism made him a little insensitive, so I laughed it off. I told my autistic roommate, who has a host of other disabilities aside from autism. She lost her mind, I'm not even kidding. She went on for like 15 minutes about how much of a schmuck Ben was and how autism doesn't have a look to it, etc., etc. Even after I said he has autism, he was insensitive and probably didn't mean it, she still went off the rails. After my failed defense, I just went back to watching her with a bored look on my face while she ranted on and on. Story 12. I'm not sure if this is exactly what you mean, but I have a couple of recurring bruh moments. Regarding colorblindness, I'd say around more than 90% of people will, as soon as they find out I'm red-green colorblind, point to some random thing near us and ask me what color it is. The most ridiculous example of this was in gym class my freshman year of high school. This kid pointed to the massive logo of our school in the middle of the basketball court and asked what color it was. I just looked at him and said, even if that was how color blindness worked, do you think I don't know what our school's colors are? Regarding autism, the problem is mainly people assuming that because I'm autistic, I must be stupid. I'm not. I probably graduated with a higher GPA than most of the people who assume this in one of the hardest programs in my school, although autism does sometimes lend itself to CS. I generally try to not tell people about my autism now. Fortunately, my disabilities are both minor and invisible, though. It's like people think colorblindness is a superpower that lets you see the true nature of the universe rather than a minor inconvenience. Story 13. I have a disabled parking permit as I have autoimmune diseases. I have trouble walking, so I walk with a cane, and my legs have trouble. It's a matter of time before I'm permanently in a wheelchair. You can visibly see that I am disabled when I move. I'm also in my mid-40s, and I don't look like I should be disabled. Last year, I parked in the disabled parking spot at the grocery store. I lift each leg out of the car onto the ground, then launch myself upwards and out of the car with my elbows on the door frame of the car. I firmly plant my cane on the ground. It's easier to do it in one motion, less pain. I always do a bit of a wobble as I stabilize myself so I don't fall over. A lady who's walking by as I've just stabilized my motion yells at me for using a disabled person's parking spot. And as she's shouting at me, I just blink at her in disbelief as I can't believe what's happening. She pushes me with her finger and I lose my footing and fall backwards into the car. She buggered off, completely disappeared. A bunch of people, real heroes, helped me get home and into my house. I'm grateful for those people that day. It took me 6 months to get over that. Story 14. Local nightclub had new owners, so they did some updates on the building as well as the name change. I went there because I knew it was accessible. Turns out one of the changes they made was to change how to get to the bathrooms. There was a wall where the slope was and the only way was the 3 stairs. By that time, I realized that I needed to use it and wasn't happy. Talked to the manager and said that's not cool. I know there's nothing he can do about it. I just wanted to point out how stupid that change was and that they no longer had me or my group of friends as customers. He apologized and offered me free drinks for the night. I had to slowly explain why I could not accept his offer and watched his face as he realized how ignorant he proved himself to be. Story 15. I'm not fully disabled, but I have a chronic illness and am allowed access to the elevator at school. In my drama program, there are 2 other students that have elevator passes. One day during our practice, the majority of the group, about 30 to 40, had to go to the 3rd floor. The 2 other people and I go onto the elevator, a friend with each of them because that's the kind of rule of thumb. Someone familiar with you in case something goes wrong. This is about 6 to 7 people now in the elevator. Several more children are trying to get onto the elevator as well, and we're all kind of like, no. Then one schmuck who thinks he's better than everyone else, not just from this occasion, is like, okay guys, some people need to get off, looking around at everyone, including those who need to use the elevator. Friends ended up speaking up about those who needed the elevator, but it made me mad because this person who is perfectly able to move throughout the floors completely disregarded the students who needed the elevator. Story 16. Not a disability, just left-right dyslexic. It's as frustratingly pathetic as it sounds because I can't navigate simple lefts and rights. I have left-right dyslexia, which makes it really hard for me to know left from right, unless I'm actively thinking about it really hard for a while. I normally don't tell anyone, and I just take a little to a lot longer to figure out directions than my friends, and often, sometimes embarrassingly, still get it wrong. Most of the time, people don't notice it, thankfully, but on occasion, there will be moments when I can't figure out for the life of me, and someone who just told me to turn left or right is watching me, not knowing which way is left, and is now really concerned about my mental health. I have to explain to them that I'm not mentally challenged or injured, just dyslexic. I don't know if dyslexic is the right word to use for it. 9 out of 10 times, they'll try to provide me with a solution to my trouble. For example, make L with your hands or which hand do you write with? And I have to politely assure them that if those methods actually help me, I wouldn't be standing here trying to figure out which way is left and which way is right, and then thank them for trying to help. Story 17. I'm not quite sure what my exact disability is, but I've struggled with mental health issues, the biggest challenge being termination. When I applied for disability after being hospitalized more than once a month, the intake worker for mental health services looked at me and said, "Well, you can read, walk, and talk. You don't need disability. You're never going to get it." I received disability 6 months later on my first try. I heard she was fired, unrelated to this, by the time I got it. I was in a crisis unit shortly before this and was diagnosed with adolescent behavior traits because I had brought up disability. It seems like they couldn't handle the idea of frequent hospitalizations. When I first started medication, 2 different people told me I didn't need medicine, I just needed video games. What an obvious solution, right? My initial diagnosis was major depressive disorder, MDD, and generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. Some doctors have argued that I actually have PTSD. I've stopped trying to figure it out. Story 18. I don't think I'm necessarily disabled, but I have dyslexia and Erland syndrome, which makes reading words and signs a real challenge. Most people don't truly understand the difficulties this presents. Every day, you'd be surprised how much of life involves reading, and I constantly encounter situations where others don't comprehend the challenges of not reading easily. While people I see daily, like schoolmates, understand the difficulty and try not to make a big deal about it after learning about it, one particular incident stands out. In a high school psychology class, we were given a handout printed on bright pink paper, which was nearly impossible for me to read. When I asked the teacher if I could skip the activity or use a laptop instead of understanding my difficulty, she started reading the words to me aloud like I was a child. I was 17. Luckily, my classmates noticed my visible embarrassment and didn't laugh. A close friend intervened, whispering the words to me instead of speaking loudly in a condescending tone, sparing me further embarrassment. Despite being a generally nice person, the teacher's actions significantly impacted my self-esteem. Story 19. A stranger at an airport once looked me in the eyes and patted me twice on the head while saying, "A great boy." For context, I was 17 years old with a full beard and definitely not a boy by any stretch of the imagination. I've been in a wheelchair for 23 years since I was 4, and after telling him about the story of my original accident, he took it upon himself to treat me like the family dog. I've never had a stranger break into my personal space and then treat me like a lesser individual like that before or since. I still don't know what the guy was thinking, because after he saw my "what are you even doing" expression, he looked like he was hurt I rejected his approving head pats and walked away. I don't want head pats from random strangers. I can't think of many people who would. Story 20. I had type 1 diabetes for 30 years. It is an incurable autoimmune disorder recognized by the ADA. What gets my goat is all the randos that come out of the woodwork telling me I can fix it with essential oils or chia seeds. No surprise, these people typically work for pyramid schemes. But sometimes people don't know that T1DM is not T2, which is a metabolic and can sometimes be more or less healed with diet and exercise, so I give them the benefit of the doubt. They're not idiots, they just don't understand the condition. It's okay. But the latest one was a woman who saw me pull out my insulin pump and said, "My dad cured his diabetes by adding matcha powder to his tea." Oh, was he type 2? Yes. They're different. Type 2 is metabolic. I have type 1. It's incurable. Her eyes glazed over, but I thought she seemed to get it. "Well, the matcha powder really worked," she said. "Oh, did it help him lose weight or something?" "No," she replied. "He had a gastric bypass for that." Cue head smack. I'm glad your dad is better, but it wasn't the tea, lady. And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. My sister-in-law had cystic fibrosis and was awaiting transplant. We were going through the process of trying to get her mobility payments and more disability allowance. It took ages for the government to get back to us, and when they finally did, this is how it goes. Them. "We'll need to see Lisa to confirm that her illness won't get better in the next 3 years." They basically didn't believe she was so ill despite being in constant oxygen. Us. "Well, unfortunately, that won't be possible as Lisa passed away 2 weeks ago." They were very polite, but I swear the system is so messed up for the people that actually need help. Story 22. Not me, but a friend of mine went in for an interview, and on the panel there were 2 men and a woman. He shook the man's hands but was horrified to see that the woman only had a left hand, with a hook and clamp prosthetic as a right hand. He was temporarily mentally flummoxed, and so rather than do the sensible thing and put his left hand out, he kept his right hand outstretched and ended up shaking her hook. To make matters worse, she then put her left hand out, and all he could think to do was to do an awkward upside-down handshake of her left hand with his right hand. She laughed it off, but he spent the whole interview mentally kicking himself for being an idiot and was convinced that he totally screwed it up. Amazingly, he got the job, and every time he met the woman again, they would do a right hand to hook handshake and follow it up with an upside-down right hand to left hand handshake, and then both cry themselves laughing. Story 23. When able people tell you to push through chronic pain and being regularly sick from a weak immune system. I was sick from work a few weeks ago and had my supervisor tell me that they went to work while they were pregnant and retched once, so I should accept it. As if people like me don't push through pain and illness to be places as it is every day. Sometimes we have to take a break or a sick day, maybe more often than able people do, but that's not because we are weak-willed or lazy. We take one because we need to, so we can carry on the next day. We work hard to be there for people, for our jobs, for our loved ones, for many things. To insinuate that the situation is basically a fault of people with a disability just not working hard enough is a giant slap in the face. Story 24. Sitting in the airport with my service dog. Our flight home is delayed, it's pouring outside, this airport flares up my conditions when I board. I nearly pass out sometimes, so I'm already not looking forward to it. The person nearby comes and decides he wants to start up a conversation. Great. We chat for a while, mostly him talking since I'm not interested, before he asks where my dog is going. Me? On the flight with me, she tucks under the seat. Rude, stranger. Wow, how do you pull that off? Me? You get disabled and have a dog highly trained to help you. RS looks me over skeptically. You're disabled? Like where? Context, I'm underweight and most people remark that without makeup I look pretty rough most days. Me, my autonomic nervous system, the part of the body that controls everything, it's dysfunctional. Thanks, though. Bruh, don't ask disabled people where they're disabled or how they're disabled or OMG, what's wrong with you? Story 25. I have ADHD, but my college campus psychiatrist can't diagnose people, only refer to them. He told me that while he couldn't diagnose me, he could say probably and referred me to someone in a nearby city. After I told him I couldn't drive multiple times. So I waited until I got back home. I need a psych to sign off on papers so I can get accommodations from the school. As it stands, I can't take notes, focus issues, miss chunks of class, focus issues again, can't complete readings more than 2 pages long, wow, more focus issues, and miss at least one class at least once a week, can't get out of my room. I have a psych back home, which is the good news. Bad news is how he took my request for a screening. He told me there was no point because I'm already in college and I'm not failing, and normally he'd interview teachers for a diagnosis, but he can't do that since I'm in college. Also, if I made it to college, clearly I'm functioning well enough to not need accommodations, right? Story 26. I'm hard of hearing and use sign language and lip reading a lot. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine had a deaf cousin visiting who didn't know me, and I saw them in a shop. As we were at opposite ends of the aisle, I waved and she waved back. Her cousin looked up and smiled, then turned to her and signed, "Do you know her? She has enormous balance." My friend fell about laughing and I walked over and signed, "Thanks very much." The poor guy was so embarrassed and apologized. We laughed it off and I went to work. My dear friend then decided to wind him up even more and told him that they were going to the local deaf center to meet some of her friends. Guess who the manager of the deaf center is? Story 27. I'm a lymphoma survivor and chemotherapy was not kind to me in the least. That being said, after I had gotten some strength back before the next chemo cycle, I used to walk with my husband at the mall. My husband went to the bathroom one time and I sat down in the walker I was using to get around. Out of the corner of my eye, I see this really angry old guy who decided to completely hassle me about using a walker and quote-unquote faking. Said I was just a lazy millennial. Let me paint you a picture. My chemo was during the summer, so I wore t-shirts. You can see the bandage-like sleeve for the PICC I had in my arm. I was pale as a ghost and looked about 2 inches from kissing the Reaper on the cheek. Plus, I had a bandana on my head because my scalp was constantly cold and I didn't have any hair. I was livid and let him have it, but it wasn't the only time I've had that crap happen. I've had older people close doors after entering the building on me. One lady actually made eye contact and shut the door. What a witch. On another note, because I underwent chemotherapy, I got a super rare side effect from it. Primary ovarian insufficiency, which is a fancy way of saying early onset menopause. I've had older women see my husband and I and rudely ask if we're planning on having kids. Like, as a general rule, just don't ask such personal questions. Even if I were feeling polite and explained I can't have kids, thanks chemo and U2 radiation, they still aggressively point out I can adopt. Straight up, I tell them to just get off afterward. Story 28. This is a story from an old mate of mine. She was born with an abnormality in both her ankles, meaning she requires a walker. Other than that, she looks and acts like any other teenage girl. Anyway, one time she headed to the local shops with her dad. He parked in one of the disabled spots, and as he stepped out and was about to open the boot to get my friend's walker out, this slightly elderly woman ran towards him and started yelling about how she needed the spot more and how he should go to prison for this. While she was yelling this, my friend poked her head out of the passenger door and slowly said, "Dad, could you get my walker?" Apparently, the color faded from the elderly woman's face and she quickly ran away. What a stupid old lady. Story 29. I have degenerative hearing loss, mostly due to it being not addressed when I was younger. The best way to explain it is I can only hear one noise at a time. If a background noise is slightly louder than the noise I'm focusing on, I can no longer hear that noise, if that makes sense. When I speak to people, I need them to look at me so I can try and read lips and also hear them better. Onto my point, my job involved a lot of industrial noise, a construction site, and I was receiving instruction from my supervisor while she was speaking quietly and looking away. Someone with good hearing would have struggled. I had to repeatedly ask her to repeat herself, so she asks in the most condescending tone, "Are you deaf or something? How hard is it to catch what I'm saying?" Boy, did I love her facial reaction when I reminded her I was. So she proceeds to shout at me afterwards. Story 30. I looked up the medication you're taking and the side effects are very bad. You need to stop taking them. Actual quote from a family member. First of all, what were you doing going through my meds? And second, the side effect of stopping them is death, so I think I'll keep taking them, thanks. Also, what happens every time I manage to make it to church? I have an immune deficiency. I'm being treated for it, but I am still incredibly prone to infection, so I try to avoid touching people as much as possible. My church is one of those where everyone shakes everyone's hands and a lot of people hug you. When I do make it to a service, I have to constantly tell people that I can't shake their hand or hug them because of my immune deficiency, and I always get the response, "But I'm not sick." Well, you might not be, but can you say the name for the dozen or so people that you have hugged in the past 10 minutes? Or they tell me that I should make an exception for them because they miss me, which is incredibly insulting given that everyone knows I am always stuck at home and no one ever even calls me to see how I'm doing. But the worst is when they ignore my protests and force a hug on me anyway. I've chewed out so many people for this. My pastor has even had to address it with a few. Never mind the consent issue, I'm already taking a big risk just being in an enclosed room with so many people. If I get sick, it can get bad very quickly. Their insistence on a hug could put me in the hospital if I catch something from them. Needless to say, I don't really attend church very often anymore. Story 31. Oh, the stories I have. I'm clinically deaf due to hearing disabilities. Please note, I can still hear, but pretty minimal. And my former friend was blind. We have shared a lot of stories with each other. One of them is from my current job. I work at a pizza place full of rude coworkers. Well, for as much as I try to let people know I literally can't hear 87% of the things they say, a button that tells people to speak up, me being open about being deaf, signing a few of the words I say, etc., my coworkers only believe me when they're being schmucks. So this happened last Saturday. After 6 months of them trying to train me on phones are so much worse than speaking. I can't lip read and the voices become extremely hard to understand. With me resisting and motioning to my button, they force me to use the phone. Crap, I'm doomed. They tell me it's my manager and I answer it, to which I am greeted with softly spoken, garbled words. The phone is turned up as high as it gets. I handed the phone over to my coworker. I motion once again to my button and politely sign, "I'm deaf." She turns up her nose at me, agrees to something the manager said on the phone and hangs up. I got a call on Monday telling me I was supposed to be at work. I don't accept incoming calls. My phone will convert messages left from the caller into text. The witch agreed to me working Monday without my consent. I was livid as I had no ride to work. I'm deaf and phones are a no-no. My coworker hands me a phone and gives sass over me not understanding. She agrees to something with my manager on the phone, possible termination coming because she agreed to schedule me on a day without me knowing and having a ride. This girl talks crap about me in front of my face, and when I tell her I'm right there, she'll always respond with, "I thought you were deaf, get your story straight." To which I'll respond, "I can't hear words, but I can certainly smell BS. My friend's story? The kid was out on a walk with me. He grew up in a small town with 100 residents at most. We stopped at a park where the two of us took a breather in the grass. A family neither of us knew approached us. One of the kids asked who we were and where we lived. Neither of us told, as we were kind of private people, and I didn't permanently live in the home I was visiting. The mother insisted we shared, and we politely refused again.